The monotonous voice of the literature teacher was depressing. Jessica stifled a yawn and tried to concentrate, but she was unbearably sleepy. That night, the girl had a terrible dream. Strange visions visited her often, and it annoyed Jess. A teenager had a lot of problems. Relationships with peers, first crushes, overprotective parents, her appearance, and then there were nightmares. Jessica was an attractive girl. The graceful beauty gathered her long, wavy hair into a sloppy bun. A scattering of freckles gave her face a unique charm. Her friends adored Jessie for her radiant smile and infectious laugh. She was a sweet and kind person, and no one suspected the heartache she was going through. At the next lesson, a new girl, Catherine, came into the classroom. The girl was seated next to Jess. Everyone's favorite took Kat under her guardianship. The classmates hugged each other goodbye. Jessie succeeded in winning over the timid, reserved girl. Jessica was walking home and suddenly felt sick. She felt dizzy, short of breath, and had difficulty taking every step. Her legs burned as if nettle bushes were mercilessly cutting into her delicate skin. The frightened girl looked around. She thought she had stepped on a barbed wire and hurt herself, but there was nothing on the sidewalk, and there was neat grass growing on the manicured lawn that Jess walked past. The girl looked at her feet, but there wasn't a scratch on them. The strange feeling quickly passed, and Jessie breathed a sigh of relief. The next school day flew by unnoticed. Jessica chatted merrily with Kat, whom she liked even more. Jess was excited to think they would play basketball together in gym class. In the locker room, Catherine acted strangely. She chose the farthest locker and changed her clothes with a detached look. Jessica thought Catherine was embarrassed and didn't want to embarrass her friend. She saw a horrible picture of Katie. Her skinny legs were covered in horrifying purple bruises. Catherine hurriedly pulled on her gym clothes. Jess wanted to rush over to the poor girl, but her classmate looked at her coldly and hostilely and walked past her. Jessica staggered confusedly to follow. They never said another word to each other. Jess pondered anxiously what had happened. She was worried about her mate and hurt that Kat had rejected her friendship. The starry, windless night offered another challenge. The girl fell fast asleep, and after midnight she rolled off the bed with a loud groan. She huddled in the corner of the room, shivering. Her heart pounded sharply and jerkingly in her chest. Her whole body was burning, stabbing. Jess lay on her side, whimpering pitifully. She didn't move, just stared at the pale moon's disk. The nightlight splashed a cold glow into the room, and out of the darkness flashed a girl's face, twisted with pain. Jessie closed her eyes, and her consciousness blacked out. In the morning, Jessica could hardly remember what had happened. There were no wounds or bruises on her body. Jess quickly got ready for class. The school buzzed like an anxious hive. The girl was stunned by the news of the terrible event. Catherine had ended up in the hospital. Kat had been beaten by her stepfather last night, and he had been arrested. Poor thing, what was she going through, Jess thought, and a sudden hunch came to mind. Maybe she could feel the pain of the people she was communicating with. But then nightmares would plague her every night. Or perhaps the suffering was transmitted through touch? Jessica withdrew into herself. Her wonderful laughter no longer rang a tinkling bell. Her emerald eyes had faded, and her cheerful freckles had turned pale. She sat in her room and refused to meet her friends. Her parents were concerned about their daughter's behavior. "We're going out tonight and invited to a housewarming party. Miranda has long wanted to meet you," her mother announced. Jess smiled tautly, but it made her happy to see her friend. The girls hadn't seen each other in a long time. They got to talking and were soon laughing merrily as they recalled childhood fun. The new apartment in the apartment building was cozy and bright. After lunch, the girls went outside. Jess saw a playground with slides, beds of bright flowers, and wrought iron lanterns. "I forgot my phone. Could you wait for me? I'll be right back." Miranda perked up and raced back to the house. Jessica nodded and strolled down the sidewalk. She was thinking about something else, and before she knew it, she was leaving the landscaped courtyard. The paved road ended. Jessie found herself on a narrow path that led to an abandoned vacant lot. She was surprised to see bright islands of roses. Redbuds peeked orphaned out of thickets of burdocks and thistles. A dilapidated brick building was visible behind the trees. A huge linden tree spread its mighty branches and shaded a small clearing. Jessie walked over to an old wooden bench beneath the perennial giant. She sat and enjoyed the subtle scent of the linden blossoms. Jess looked around and fantasized about what had happened in these ruins years ago. A child's cry broke the peaceful silence. The desperate cry rang and vibrated. Jessica jumped up and rushed to find the child in distress. She ran through the tall grass and peered deep into the thicket. Suddenly, The girl realized she couldn't feel her right leg. Jessie strolled and tried not to step on the numb limb. The same sensation appeared in her other leg, then in her arms. The girl was terrified. She stopped, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. The obsession disappeared. Jessica was glad, but her joy was short-lived. When she opened her eyes, she could not see anything. There was impenetrable darkness around. The girl turned and walked backward. She put her arms out in front of her and stepped carefully on the ground. Sharp pain in her stomach made her crouch. Liz tried to call out for help, but all she heard from her throat was dry wheezing. She couldn't make a sound, but she regained her sight. Jessica ran away from the cursed place, but stopped abruptly when the world around her fell silent. No more birdsong or leaves rustling in the ominous silence. She clapped her hands together, but heard nothing. "I am deaf," she thought, but she listened to a child's laughter at the exact moment. Rainbow-colored, tinkling tunes sounded everywhere, with happiness and joy in the air. Euphoria gripped the teenager. Jessie laughed infectiously, and the child's cheerful laughter echoed. The musical polyphony was suddenly silent. Jessica was at a complete loss. She walked without looking back, as if she knew she was safe. Miranda waited for her friend in the playground. They walked around and went inside the apartment. The girl overheard the adults talking. A great neighborhood was built on the site of the old children's hospital. Jess realized that she had experienced the energy that permeated the area. The following weekend, her parents took Jessica to her grandmother's house in the village. The girl knew and remembered every corner of the old house well. In the big cozy chair, she listened to her grandmother's tales. Little naughty Jess loved to hide in the wooden closet. The branchy tree in the yard was a favorite spot from which she watched her surroundings. And there was the creaky swing. Along with the neighborhood kids, Jessie rode all day. Jessica had forgotten their faces, only their names. Peter, Penny, and little Jenny. Jenny carried her fat red cat, Oscar, everywhere she went. Jess was always in a hurry to visit her friends in the village. But one day she was bitterly disappointed. Mr. Harris abandoned his wife, Bridget, took the children, and they left. Poor Bridget was distraught, searching for her treacherous husband and children, but to no avail. She lived a humble life, tending an orchard. The locals considered her a terrible miser. Many years later, Mrs. Harris got a cat, a replica of Oscar, and after he died, she surprisingly found the same red-haired bandit with different eyes. The girl sat on the swing and remembered happy days from her childhood. She saw Mrs. Harris and waved hello. The older woman responded with a broad smile. The older woman was busily commanding the movers putting crates of fruit into the car. Bridget was taking the crops to the fair in the neighboring town. She went away for several days, so she took Oscar with her. The cat walked past the girl with a critical look and sat in the cat carrier. The neighbor got in her car and drove away. Jess hurried home, her grandmother calling her. The fresh air was suitable for teenagers. Jessie slept well. The nightmares no longer plagued her. But this night was special. Someone's gaze awakened Jessica. She sat up on the bed and cried out in surprise. A red cat nestled comfortably on the windowsill, staring boldly at the girl. The green eye looked stern and demanding, while the blue eye winked mockingly. The red hair was not glossy, and the cat had lost weight, looking less critical. Jessica got out of bed, and the nocturnal visitor quickly jumped into the street. Mrs. Harris was distraught when she saw her pet run away, the girl thought. Jessica suddenly felt a vicious hunger. She crept into the kitchen, not wanting to disturb her grandmother. The girl stood by the refrigerator and hurriedly stuffed steaks and roasted vegetables into her mouth, drinking juice straight from the bottle. All the cookies were gone from the vase on the table. The sweets Jess couldn't eat, she scattered in her pajama pockets. Jessica tiptoed into her room and fell soundly asleep. The following day, Grandma made a nutritious breakfast. Jess realized that her nightly meal had not gone unnoticed. She was a little embarrassed, but Grandma was glad her granddaughter had a good appetite, and the girl realized that something strange was happening to her. The day passed without incident. By nightfall, Jessica became agitated, and an uneasy feeling did not leave her. She sat by the window long, gazing into the semi-darkness. It was stuffy. Thunderclaps sounded, and fiery arrows of lightning cut through the darkness. The wind supported the onslaught of the elements and drove leaden clouds towards the sleeping village. Jess shivered. After another peal of thunder, the girl heard a pitiful meow. It was Oscar. The cheeky redhead is frightened by the thunderstorm. I must save the poor cat, the girl thought. Jessica hurriedly put on her jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and rushed outside. She ran to her neighbor's house. The meowing sound continued, but she couldn't figure out where the frightened animal was hiding. Finally, Jess guessed that the cat had cowered in the basement. The girl resolutely picked up a large stone and knocked down the lock. The door opened with an eerie creak. The dim light of the flashlight illuminated the path poorly. She walked by touch. Oscar was no longer meowing. The cat was yelling loudly, insistently, invitingly. Around her, wooden lay crates, old furniture, and dusty bags of patching. The stench in the basement was unbearable. Jess squeaked squeamishly. It must have been the rotting vegetables and fruit, and the greedy old lady was sorry to throw them away, Jessica thought. The girl walked into the spacious, half-empty room. A cat's howl sounded close, but she couldn't see Oscar anywhere. She stumbled and grabbed the wall to keep from falling, but it wasn't the wall. The teenager's hand bumped against a narrow wooden door. Jess pushed the handle as hard as she could. The door opened. There were 3 beds in a small, windowless room. Human remains in half-decayed robes lay on the dirty mattresses. Jess screamed and rushed out of the basement. The last thing she saw were wisps of red hair next to the little body. The police arrested Mrs. Harris. The woman confessed to killing her husband and drowning him in the river. She gave the children sleeping pills, took them to the basement, and tied them up. They starved to death. The crazy older woman said she was tired of feeding them. Oscar went to live with Grandma Jess. It turned out that the cat hadn't run away from his mistress. He had been brought in from the city by neighbors. The girl wasn't surprised. She knew who had lured her to the scene. Jessica stopped suffering and agonizing. She accepted her gift with humility. I was born to help people. With this bright thought, she found a new meaning in life.